Hi guys, welcome back to the Creative Corner. So, I've been avoiding talking about this book, but this seems like a great day to do it because, see, I pissed off someone on the internet. I know, this day and age it's easy to do, but I pissed off someone because I used a comparison of Nazi Germany to talk about the situation in the US right now. And because I didn't back down, first of all, I'm proud of myself for standing my ground. Not something I usually do. Second of all, I'm still feeling really messy from it. And since I'm feeling messy anyway, let's talk about the tea. Figured now's a great time to spill the tea since I'm feeling messy. So, this book had been postponing talking about for the longest time because I wasn't sure how to talk about it without talking about other things. And I don't care. Maybe we need to talk about these other things. And if the people who were involved in the creation of the tea happen to watch this, well, that's their issue, not mine. Because I'm moving forward and we need to discuss how not all Christians are mean and not all Christians condone certain things. And so we are gonna talk about that with this book. So this book is not one that you would think would cause those topics to come up. Honestly, if you are part of a church, part of a stereotypical church, let's do that, this book probably isn't even on your radar, all right? It's called Say a Little Prayer, and the main character's bisexual, and her sister has had an abortion, and another character in here is possibly lesbian, I'm not sure. And so this is actually an FF romance, okay? A YAFF romance. And that's not the type of book you would expect, stop boys, to have massive Christian values and vibes in it. But the author saw an opportunity here and took it. Okay, and so we're going to talk about this book. When you open this book, the first thing you see is an author's note where she's telling you that this idea came from a concept. The idea for this book came from something she read that said, what if someone went to church camp and tried to commit all 7 deadly sins in 1 week? This book made me feel the deadly sin of wrath. I'm not going to lie. I was so angry through this book. I had to put it down multiple times because I was that angry. It made me livid, legitly livid. And so, and not for reasons you would think, not because of how it was displaying Christians to be, but because of the fact that Christians, some Christians, not all Christians, are like that. And I do want to point out that there are 2 types of Christians in this book. There are the good kind that understand that churches are hospitals, not temples for the saints, and that they should love everyone and basically abide by the love the sinner, hate the sin concept. And so you can disagree that, you can say that something's wrong and say that you don't agree with something but still not hate the person, okay? And then there are Christians who take it a step too far and become zealots and crusaders and decide that if you sin in any way, mostly when we see this applied to homosexuality and other religions. If you sin by having a different God, or if you sin by having a partner that's of the same gender, then you are doomed for hell and there's like no salvation for you. And they become holy rollers and it's all fire and brimstone to them, instead of taking in the fact of the New Testament that Jesus died and we are supposed to approach this with love and kindness and not with hatred in our souls, okay? But there are plenty of people who do approach it with hatred in our souls. And so we do see both types of Christians in this book. Also, our main characters in this book are all teenagers, okay? Which is also a big point to make, because when you are a teenager, especially a Christian teenager, you are already going through so many changes in your body and trying to figure out who you are and social changes and everything. And then add on top of that you have these standards set for you by whatever religion you're a part of, whatever, and not only religion, whatever denomination you're a part of. It is not said in here flat out what the denomination that our main character was a part of is, and it doesn't tell you what Pleasant Hill is, all right? But I don't know. In my head, they're Baptist. I don't know why. In my head, they're Baptist. I was raised Nazarene, not Baptist. I do have relatives who are Baptist. Between the Baptist and Nazarene, the core values are all still the same. Same with like Catholic, Jewish. The core truth is still the same. All right. What makes it a separate denomination is the extra things like I went to a Lutheran school. The Lutherans believe that you can have wine. The communions are wine. No matter your age, their communion is wine. I could not participate in their communions when they did it at school during Ash Wednesday and stuff because of the fact that I was Nazarene. And the Nazarene doctrine says you shouldn't drink. Okay? And so we do, because they see it, the Nazarene doctrine sees it as a temptation. And there are Nazarenes that do drink, okay? Which, we don't hold it against them. You do you. It's not like, but it's frowned upon, and they would not give us teenagers communion with that in it, so our communion was always grape juice, okay? But the Lutheran school I went to, their communion was not grape juice because it was communion, and it was seen as an exception kind of thing. So, yeah. And so there's just differences like that, but the overall core values of denominations are the same. There's also differences in like the setup, like if you have elders or not. The church in this book has a board. And I don't know if Baptist churches have a board. The Nazarene church has a board. Some churches have a council of elders, which is the older people in the group, and the older people in the church are basically the ones in charge. And then like there are churches like the Nazarene who have a board and a pastor, and the board is in charge ultimately of everything. They're the one who picks the pastor. They're the ones who make decisions for the church, and it's supposed to make it where it's basically a democracy kind of thing, and they all vote. But we don't know. The church in here has a board, but that doesn't tell us what denomination it is. And so we don't know going in what denomination it is. But the denomination I don't think is ultimately important because, like I said, core values are the same. So our main character is bisexual. She's openly bisexual. But that's not why she left the church. She left the church willingly. That's important to note. Okay, she decided to leave the church willingly. Her older sister, was ostracized by the church for having an abortion, and she was basically kicked out without being kicked out. Like, the church didn't say you can't come back, but the church heavily implied that she couldn't come back. And I've kind of seen that happen before. I didn't know that that's what I was witnessing at the time because I was a child, okay? And so I'm not going to use names here, and because I was a child, I only know what it was from adults later on, okay? But when I was a kid, there was a teenager, and this teenager was the nicest teenager ever. And he and another teen would hang out with us kids all the time, all right? This teenager's favorite color was pink. He was a boy, and rumors started flowing that maybe he was gay, okay? One Sunday, he didn't show up, and then the next Sunday, he didn't show up. And from a kid point of view, we were just like, yo, where'd he go? He just stopped coming? Well, I found out as an adult after asking my parents about it, because my dad was on the church board at that time. When I was a children, he was the children's church director. When I was a teen, he was a teen youth director. When I was an adult, he was a pastor. I literally grew up with him as a pastor, okay? And so he was on the board at that time, and I had asked, and I was told basically that the church didn't outright kick this boy out, but had made his family feel so bad and segregated that they felt like they no longer belonged, to the point where they ended up leaving. And we see that happen in this story with our main character's sister. The teens that were friends with her sister state that they remember the conversation that the pastor had with her and how he implied that she shouldn't be there anymore and how it was unforgivable what she did. And she leaves and she's sad and she cuts off all ties with her old friends. And the main character thinks it's her old friend's fault. But it come to find out it's because they didn't know the whole story. The guy who got her sister pregnant made it seem like he wanted the baby, even though he's the one that told her that she needed to have an abortion or he wasn't going to support her and the child. So she had an abortion out of necessity instead of want. She didn't actually want to do it, but she did it because the father wasn't going to be involved. The father wasn't going to support her. She was in her junior year of high school, and so she made a decision. But then he turned around and said that he wanted it and he blamed it all. He wanted the child and he blamed it all on her. And everyone believed his word over hers. Okay? And so our main character has a lot of religious trauma already going in because of this, because she saw how her sister was treated. She saw how the friends took the other person's side, and she's angry. Right? Rightfully so. So she's angry. And so then the start of the book kicks off with something that I also find really weird. She gets in a fight. Someone calls her a slur, okay? And she gets in a fight with him and punches the girl in the face. And instead of the girl getting in trouble for calling her a slur, she gets in trouble for punching the girl, which I personally think that's a natural consequence. You're going to call someone that, they're going to retaliate, okay? Because we all are going to react if we are threatened, right? It's a natural instinct. But then the principal tells her, which I think is kind of illegal, tells her that she either is going to be suspended and can't participate in the drama program that she loves so dearly, or she has to go to Bible camp. I live in a small town. I grew up in a conservative city, and our teachers they can talk more about their religion with their students than you would expect, right? Because there is supposed to be this divide. You're not supposed to tell your students about your political reviews or religious reviews. And most do abide by that, but you can get away with it because if a kid asks you, you can talk to them about it and stuff. And church is very much part of our society here. And so I find it weird that the principal required Bible camp, because that's almost like forcing religion down someone's throat, and that's not allowed in the school system. And so I'm not sure how he got away with that, but for the sake of the plot, I decided to ignore it and move on. All right, so this girl goes to Bible camp reluctantly, but because she wants to play in Shrek the Musical. And so she goes, which I understand, I love Shrek the Musical. So she goes to Bible camp reluctantly, and while she's there, she sees friends that she hasn't seen since she left church, and she realizes she really misses them. Okay, and these friends are good people. They are great people, and they live the way a Christian should live. They live with love, they live with hope, they live with guidance. They are a community. They want to help each other out and not tear each other down. All right? But she finds out that the theme for this Bible camp is the 7 virtues and going against the 7 deadly sins. And so she goes, I'm pissed at the pastor, because her whole deal is she's really mad at the pastor and she wants to expose the pastor for being like a dictator in the church. And so she's like, I'm going to commit every deadly sin, which first off, if you know the deadly sins in a YA book, I was like, you're going to what? Because one of the deadly sins is lust. And in a YA book, that raises some red flags, right? The idea that they're going to commit that. And so she goes down the list and she's finding ways to commit these sins. And I would argue that she doesn't actually commit these sins, all right? She commits the sin of greed by buying something for herself and convincing her friend to buy something for themselves when they've been instructed not to buy something for themselves and to buy something for another person. She commits the sin of wrath by getting angry and smashing these crystal angels that are on a treehouse. she commits the sin of sloth by just refusing to do an activity that they are told to do. Okay, and so, I mean, I don't think the sins, the deadly sins, are like accurately committed in this book. I think she was just being a rebellious teenager. But when it does come to wrath, this book did make me feel the deadly sin of wrath to the point that I wanted to throw this book out the window and didn't want to finish it, but I did want to finish it because I needed to know if that pastor got what was coming to him. The pastor in this book is toxic. Okay, if you've ever gone to Bible camp, which the author of this book obviously has gone to Bible camp because a lot of the stuff they did, we did do at Bible camp. Okay, if you've ever gone to Bible camp, you know that you have to go to daily sermons, and you know that you have daily, like, meetings that you have with, like, a team of your peers to work on whatever is going on. We were never given a workbook, though. They're all given a workbook that they're supposed to fill out in a prayer journal. We were given prayer journals, all right? But we were never given a workbook. Also, for the sin of gluttony, to prevent them from doing the sin of gluttony, the pastor locked the food pantry and forced the kids, the teenagers, to go on a 24-hour hunger fast. That has to be abuse, right? You can't force people to fast, especially if you're an adult at a camp. Aren't you required to give them food? So yeah, the pastor needed help. The pastor is toxic. The pastor's daughter is our main character's best friend, and she is struggling because this isn't really a spoiler because you can figure it out. If you read it, you can figure it out really easily. She's struggling because she has a crush on a girl, all right? But she doesn't want to be kicked out of the church. And so she's talking to her friends. We're going to have to undo this. And she's been very distant from her friends in here, and they're all like, what is up with her? Why is she being this way? But while they're at camp, all these teens start talking about our main character's sister and what it was like for them when they left and how glad they are to see her. And she starts talking about the stuff she went through. And they all realize that they're all scared and that the fear of hell by association has made them act in unchristianly ways. Like, they were, part of them was afraid that if they hung out with her sister who had an abortion, that they would end up going to hell because of the fact that they were friends with her. But the Bible says that God will forgive you no matter what. So, I mean, whether you agree that abortions are wrong or not, whether you think it's a sin or not, all sins can be repented. There's only one unforgivable sin, and the only person in history who has ever committed the unforgivable sin is Satan, and it is, at least in my denomination, I don't know what other denominations is, the unforgivable sin is seeing God face to face, knowing his power, and still turning your back on him. And that is the only one that we know of who has ever done that is Satan, because us humans don't have that, like, face-to-face personal connection with him yet. Ours is all a spiritual-based thing. So, and I would argue that it isn't an unforgivable sin. I would argue that Satan could be redeemed. I know that's quite the accusation. I would argue that if he asked for forgiveness, he could be redeemed, but he won't ask for forgiveness because ultimately his deadly sin is pride, and he's too prideful to ask for forgiveness. And so Satan's going to remain Satan. All right. But that's just my belief on that. But anyway, they find out that their fear of damnation stopped them from actually showing love and showing kindness and showing redemption and forgiveness to their friend. And they find out that they've been unknowingly slandering her name and hurting her reputation, and they all feel really bad. And our main character finds out that she too is not innocent. That, yeah, she's been hurt by the church, but the way you act is all in your control. You can't control your trauma. You can't control what happens to you, but you can control what you do after that fact, all right? I have religious trauma. as we talked about. I can control what happens afterwards. I can't control that it happened. I can't control that people tried to convince my little sister to say that she was RAPED when she got pregnant out of wedlock, just so that they had an excuse for this baby that wasn't a willingly act of disobedience against the law that they sat down. Okay, I can't control that someone, an older white lady in the church, whispered behind my parents' back, but in front of us kids, that they couldn't believe that my parents would take in 2 black children because why should they be raising someone who isn't their race, and those children should be raised by someone else because it wasn't appropriate. I can't control the fact that the church that we were a part of wanted my family, specifically my father, to do all of this work and all the renovations around the church, despite the fact that he had back problems, but still willingly took away his health insurance when he offered because they couldn't make ends meet. I can't control that. I can't control how angry that makes me feel, but I can control not slandering their names. I can control not telling people who it is. I can control whether I forgive them or not, and I do forgive them. I am still angry about it, and I will never, ever go back to that church again. Ever. I actually have a hard time going to any church now because of it, which is sad, because up until that church, churches were my safe spot. I grew up in a church in a city where we had bikers that would come, and they would come in their vests and they would sit in church, and they would help with children's events and potlucks and afterglows and tent revivals, and they would play kickball with us and go on the hayrack rides with us. I went from that to a church that told my brother he was going to hell because he listened to rock music. I'm sorry, hold on. And we knew going into this church that it was a different community, and we knew going into this church things were going to be different. My parents, God bless their souls, have never pushed anything on us kids. My dad had always wanted to be a pastor, and the thing that makes me the maddest about that whole situation is that he left that church no longer wanting to be a pastor, and that he said that he will no longer get back into the ministry ever again because of that church. And he was a great preacher, and he loves people, and he went out of his way to take some of my friends out of domestic abuse situations so that they'd be safe. He went out of his way to get kids into youth group programs so that they didn't have to go to juvenile. He is one of the kindest souls I've ever met. And now he just feels so hurt and broken because of everything he gave up for that church and was then taken advantage of. And I think that's what makes me the maddest. But I know what it's like, getting that religious trauma and having to make the decision on how you're going to react. And our main character in this book is a teenager. And when this happened to me, I was a college student. And it is hard to not be angry. Okay? Especially during that point in your life. You're still a child. Okay? So she's angry and she's lashing out. And she's being very vicious and being rebellious and just trying to literally do the opposite of what the people that she sees as being the villains did to her. She's trying to do the opposite of what they say. Now, there is a nice little conclusion in this book, because the main character ultimately decides to go back to the church just because they're having a camp get together. And so she goes there, and she just wants to go because she wants to see her friend. She wants to make amends because they got into an argument, all right? And she wants to fix this because she's missed these people, and she's come to this conclusion that yes, she can be angry at the pastor, and yes, she can disagree with what the pastor did to her family, and she can disagree with what the church did, because she's also mad that the church didn't stand up against the decision that was made, okay? Which is fair. No one backed up her sister. Her sister was a teenage girl, and not a single person in that church outside of her parents came to her aid, okay? And that is not what a church is supposed to freaking do. She is a child. They should have supported her through this. They should have helped her make this decision. They should have asked her why she made this decision instead of just auto-condemning her, because it is not our right as human beings to judge people. That is God's right. Our job is to show them God's love, to give them the forgiveness, to be companions and friends with them, and to lead them to a better life through the way we act. Okay? This church did not meet that standard. So our main character goes back to the church to attend this thing, and the pastor breaks another law. And this really pissed me off, because I've only been in 2 youth groups that my dad wasn't the leader of, okay? Because like I said, I grew up with him in every stage of the church, right? But I did have some leaders who were not my parents, which was very good, because you need youth group leaders that aren't part of your family, because you need to feel safe to talk to them. And sometimes you don't want to tell your family things that you're going through. My favorite youth group leaders, I will say their names in this, because they were not involved in the church that caused my drama. And I do miss them. It was Amaryllis and Aaron, and they were just the best. They started off as teens, and then they outgrew our teen group, and they said, hey, can we help? And my dad said, yeah, we would love for you to help. And they became our youth group leaders, and they took us to events, and they talked to us. All the boys would go to Aaron if they had issues. All the girls would go to Amaryllis if we had issues. And we felt like we could tell them anything and that they wouldn't judge us. And that is what you need as a youth group leader. Someone who you feel safe enough to talk to, and they will still guide you and offer guidance based on biblical passages and stuff in their own experiences. And we had that with them, all right? But our main characters in here did not have that. And so she goes there, and this whole thing is supposedly set up to make it where all these kids will come back to this church. Some of these kids have other churches, and they state that. They state that they have other churches. They don't want to go to this church because their church treats them nicer, and they don't feel like they're going to go to hell if they accidentally steal a piece of gum or something, okay? So they all show up at this church, and then the pastor makes a mistake again. While cleaning out the cabins, they find a girl's prayer book. And in this girl's prayer book, the pastor read it. Prayer books should never be read by anyone outside of the author. Okay, our youth group leaders would have never done that. They would have never crossed that boundary line. A prayer book is a journal between you and God. No one else should read that book, ever, okay? So the fact that he opened it, first of all, and read it was a freaking disrespect to the entire community of Christians. And secondly, the fact that what he read in it, he then felt the need to not address the teens in a proper way, but to humiliate humiliate them. He brings this book up and he reads a passage of it, and the girl who wrote it says, I am having unnatural, because she's struggling, unnatural urges towards another girl. What do I do? Am I sinning, and what is going on? She's trying to figure this out. She's praying about this, trying to figure out if this is right or wrong in her brain and her soul, if she's getting an answer or not. Okay, and instead of being able to work this out in private between her and God, the pastor brings us out and demands that one of the girls stands up mid-sermon and admit it's theirs. Spoiler alert, it's his daughters. Yeah. The teen girls are aware. The teen girls who were in the cabin are aware that it's his daughters, because they all have an idea. And the best friend does know it's his daughters. So the best friend stands up. Everyone already hates her in this church. So she's like, you know what? I'm going to take the blame. I'm not going to let this destroy her. So she stands up and she goes, it's mine. And the pastor goes, I knew it was yours. And just like rips into her to humiliate her in front of everyone. And then this makes me so happy, because I was in our youth group that this would have happened. Then the other girls one by one stand up and say it's theirs. And so the pastor can't ultimately decide whose it is. And it makes him really angry. Okay. And then to make things even worse on his part, they walk out. Now, the brother of the girl who wrote the book comes out and tells them that the pastor is trying to play it off as if it was all part of an example, and that he planned all this, but there are people in the congregation that are like, what had just happened? Why did our kids feel like they needed to walk out of church? This is supposed to be a safe place. And it really opens eyes, okay? But they all congregate in the women's bathroom, which that's where we congregated at church. I mean, if you needed to chat with someone, you went to the women's bathroom. In their women's bathroom, they mentioned that they had a picture of Eve, and they thought it was like a way to tell them that women are evil and that they have to repent for this sin that they never committed, kind of thing. In our women's bathroom, we had a picture of Jesus knocking on a door. So, I mean, I thought that imagery was interesting, that this church wanted to, like, put a nail in the coffin where you escape to the bathroom and you still come face to face with the original sin. And as a girl, that's rough, because you get blamed for that. They're like, well, if Eve hadn't done this. I'm not Eve. Sure, Eve ate the apple, but I didn't eat the apple, okay? Yeah, we're all taking part of that punishment. We all have painful childbirths and everything, but we're serving our punishment. It's not up to us. You don't have to condemn us for it, kind of thing, all right? And by the way, Adam is not innocent. Adam could have totally said no, but he still ate the apple anyway. But anyway, so they all congregate there to talk about this, and they all decide that they're just going to leave. They're done. And then they ask the girl who wrote it, they go, what's your home life going to be like? Are you okay? Do we need to get you out? Is he going to hurt you because of this? Because he gives the vibes that he might be emotionally abusive, the pastor, but we don't know. And the girl goes, no, he's not going to do anything about it, because if he really thought it was me, we would have handled this privately. And I did like that was brought up, because as a pastor's daughter, there were only a couple times that I can remember that an issue that I had was not handled privately. Okay? Most of the time, my parents dealt with it at home, out of the eyes and view of the congregation. There was one time when my dad and I got into a massive fight in front of the church, in the churchyard. And then there was another time where I called my brother a demon, which I don't think is as big of a deal as it was made out to be. But I called him a demon for something that he did, and I was just mad. And then it was used as an illustration in a sermon the next week, because as a pastor's kid, half the crap you do ends up in your parents' sermons. But something like this would have never been in a sermon. This would have been a one-on-one conversation between my parents and I. And so I am very lucky that I have the parents that I have, and that I had the home church that I had, because people don't talk enough. People talk about having religious trauma and then not going back to church, but people don't talk enough about having religious trauma and going back to church. I have religious trauma. I don't go to church, because after the trauma I got, I can't bring myself to trust another church. Okay, I just can't. But that doesn't denote my religious beliefs. Like, I am still Christian. I still pray to God. I pray to him nightly to change the hearts of our leaders, to guide our leaders, to be with people, to protect my family, to help me become the best version of myself, to know what I should and should not say. I pray to him daily, okay? But I'm not gonna put myself back into that same situation, and I'm definitely not going to trust those people again. You can forgive someone and not forget. And that's what ultimately our main character in this book learns, is that she doesn't need to be angry. She needs to move on. She needs to forgive and not set out to destroy this pastor's reputation, because ultimately his actions are going to speak for themselves, and people are going to realize that he is not as Christian as he says he is. He is very fire and brimstone, and not in a good way. Not in a tent revival way, okay? But, like, this guy is what we would call an Old Testament preacher, all right? He preaches with fear and hatred and not with love and kindness. But she ultimately learns that she can forgive and move on. And the pastor's daughter ultimately learns that it is her life and she has to make her choices. And she has to decide if something is wrong or not based upon how she feels inside. Because we all have human souls. And our human souls will tell us what's right or wrong. In my mind, the biggest commandments God ever gave us were the 10 Commandments and to love our neighbor as our friends. Okay? And I feel like if we follow those, we are doing God's will. They also really learn that the other friends also learn that you can be friends with people you don't agree with. Like, some of their friends are very unsure if they are okay with the main character being bisexual and another character being lesbian. They don't know if they're okay with that. But they do know that they love them as human beings and that they are friends with them. And so they don't want to lose them in their life. And so they set out to understand where the other person's coming from. And basically they reach the point where, it's your lifestyle. If that's what you're living, that's how you're living. It ultimately doesn't affect me. It's between you and God. What it is what it is. And I'm going to love you as I have always loved you and be your friend. And they take on a more Christian approach. And we do see a lot of people leave the church, the toxic church in here, and go towards another one that one of their friends mentions. One of their friends is like, my church isn't like this. My church is one town over, and it's actually more accepting, and it's actually less fire and brimstone. And if you need to talk about stuff, our youth teachers will talk to you about it. I only come to this church camp because our church can't afford to do a church camp. And so a lot of them end up switching churches. And that's okay too. And so this book does a lot with religious trauma, and it made me angry because it brought up emotions from my past and emotions that I haven't had to feel for a while because of the fact that I don't talk to probably 98% of the people from that church anymore. I talk to some of the people I went to youth group with. I talked to all the people I went to youth group with. I didn't go to youth group in that church that caused my drama. I was in college, and at that point, I was too old for children's and youth group, but not old enough for adult, and so I just decided not to go to Sunday school, and instead I was like, hey, I'll teach children's church, because I didn't have anywhere else to belong, so I was like, and I talked to those kids. I talked to the kids I taught, all right? They'll reach out to me occasionally, and I have them on Facebook, but, there's only really one family of people from that church that I have any communication with now. And I love them. They're great. Their son and I went to the same college, and we have very similar views in life. And I feel like we both understand the pressure of what it was like growing up and stuff as a pastor's kid, because you are under a magnifying glass. Even when people say you aren't, you are. Okay, there is this unspoken pressure for you to be better. And so, I do talk to them, but most of the people from that church I cut off. All right, and sometimes you have to do that. Sometimes you have to cut it off, because even in the world today, you see, for instance, a group of Christians was protesting the Walk for Peace. Why? They want the same thing we want. Yeah, they're from a different religion, but that doesn't matter. You're protesting them because they're Buddhist? How would you feel if someone came and protested you because you're Christian? Okay? Like, we both want peace. We both want love and kindness. So instead of protesting that, you should actually be helping them. And so, yeah. You see false Christians out there. You see the hypocrites. You see the zealots. But I want you to know that not everyone is like that, all right? And this book does accurately show that, even though the majority of the adult Christians in this book that we meet are toxic, and the majority of the teens we meet are not toxic. Both do exist in the world, and I want you to know that some of us don't condone certain actions by others of our kind. And so, hopefully, if you're a Christian, you're a safe Christian, and you're not you deserve to go to hell Christian. Hopefully you preach love and kindness over the pits of damnation, because at the end of the day, at the end of eternity, it's not you who's making that call. It's God. And personally, I'm glad it's him, because I wouldn't want to make that call. All right. And yes, we have to step in when things happen like murders. Yes, we have to make a decision because that person has impacted society. But if someone's sin, because, okay, I don't know if I want to get involved in that concept. Some passions, the Bible is a book, ultimately, and because of that, there's symbolism in it. And so there are some things people say are sins that other people say aren't sins, such as drinking. Bible doesn't say you can't drink, it says don't get drunk. Okay, but some people say that means don't drink at all. Others say that means I can drink in moderation. Sodom and Gomorrah, some people use that passage to say that relationships that are not man and woman are unholy. Others use it to say that it was more about the fact that the people were not, they weren't listening to consent. Consent didn't matter to them. And that passage, the reason why that city was destroyed was more because of raped than homosexual acts. And so because it's a Bible, because it's a book, because we aren't sitting across the person who wrote the book, it is left up to interpretation and points. And because of that, there are sins that are not sins to other people. So at the end of the day, you have to rely on what your soul tells you. You have to rely on what you think is good or evil based upon what you've talked to God. Most of humanity in general, whether they're Christian or not, do follow the 10 Commandments. If you look at it, it's almost like it's a natural law that's built into our souls. Imagine that. Like, most religions actually follow that too. And so there is like this built-in natural sense of ethics and morality that we all have, but there is a lot of gray area too that we all have to flounder through. And this book shows these teenagers not only coming of age, but coming of age in a religious setting and having to deal with that and discover what they think is right or wrong. And so I do think this book is worth the read. I did ultimately give it 5 stars. I can't give a book that makes me angry not 5 stars because it evoked a powerful emotion, okay? Like the freaking book, Corrections by Jonathan Franzen. I hate that book. We'll never read that book again. If I had to review that book, I would give it 5 stars because I hate the book. Okay, because it invoked this sense of, well, I said it earlier to someone I pissed off on Facebook. If something makes you uncomfortable, if something offends you, that tells you what you believe. Okay, that book offended me. That book made me uncomfortable. That book got one of my favorite professors fired at a Christian university. And if a book can cause that much drama, if a book can cause that much emotional power, that much thought-provoking conversations, that book is a 5 star. That book is off the scale. And so this book is a 5 star because it does provoke those emotions and it does make you think. I don't know if I'll ever read it again. In fact, I'm going to just tell you, I will never read it again. Primarily because I don't read to be angry, and it makes me very angry. I want to reach into that book and save every single one of these teenagers from that pastor, but I can't. Okay? But 5 star. So, if you're dealing with some kind of religious trauma and want to feel seen, maybe read this book. If you're a teenager who is struggling to understand your ethics, your morals, you could read this book, but I also suggest that it is for teenagers, by the way. It is a YA book. I do also suggest that you reach out to your youth pastors if you have good youth pastors and talk to them about it. If you do not have good youth pastors, then don't. To determine whether your youth pastor is good or not, can you trust them? Okay, that's the basic question. And my parents used to say, and my youth pastors, Aaron and Amaryllis, used to say too, everything you tell me is safe between us unless it hurts you or someone else. If it was going to result in you getting physically hurt or someone else getting physically hurt or emotionally abused or anything like that, then they had the obligation actually to go to authorities and remove you from that situation, okay? But otherwise they were there to guide you. And that is just adults being good adults, okay? That is them trying to help you, okay? Another thing that I need to touch on before we go, because I mentioned it at the beginning and I just remembered, the lust part in this book, when she goes to do it, thank God it was not full-blown lust, all right? That's why I said that I don't think she actually accurately committed all deadly sins. It's weird to say accurately commit a sin. Like there's some chart for how this is a sin. This is how you commit a sin. This isn't how you don't commit that sin, which I guess it kind of is, vices and virtues, and that's what this book talks about. But to commit the sin of lust, she kissed a girl. That's not lust. Okay, that's my opinion. But it's just a kiss. There's nothing else. There's no explicit content in this book. It remains a good YA book that has a clean rating. There's no explicit content, no inappropriate stuff for this age level. So I felt like that was important to say. So anyway, that's this book review. Some of you had asked me to review it. I didn't know if I wanted to because I knew I'd have to talk about some religious stuff while talking about this book. There's no way around it. I couldn't come up with a way to talk about it without discussing that stuff. Yeah, so there you go. There's Say a Little Prayer. Hope y'all enjoyed it. Try not to get too far into the tea and give away names because, as I said, the people involved in my own religious trauma could be redeemed at this point. Maybe they realize what they did was wrong. Maybe they realize what they did hurt us. And maybe they've moved on. I don't know. They're not part of my life anymore. I don't plan on them ever being part of my life again. I gotta cut them out. And ultimately, at the end of the day, my relationship with God and my spirituality depends on me and Him and not humanity. And so, yeah. But that's where I am. And you guys can chat in the comments if you want. Of course, always keep it civil. If you're part of a denomination, let me know how you guys see this and what you think about this book. If you've read the book, let me know what you think about it, that kind of thing. But just be aware if you go into this book that it does talk about religious trauma and being part of a church and religious trauma and not being part of a church, okay? And